Afternoon, everybody. Just before I start, I would like to say, just want to pass on my thanks to the committee, because you can see there's all sorts of stuff going on, and I know from experience how much time these guys are putting in, so kudos, because I tell you what, it's not the easiest task, particularly dealing with the powers that be at government level and whatever, so I think I thought I was sat next to somebody from the German national team here. I know I've taken on a few. I know I've taken on a few German trips, but it's going a bit far now. Anyway, compelling few weeks, very interesting. Seems to be moving on daily. I'm just going to take. Unless people want me to do a summary of what's gone on, I can just take questions from the floor. What's the view? Do you want a summary of what's happened over the last 2 weeks? Quick one? Yeah, okay. All right, so we've obviously, just putting in context, we had the judgment on the 4th or 6th of November, which is the 31.27 million, plus interest, plus costs, which is probably worth something north of 35 to 37 million. In total, plus Manchester, which I think they've paid 1.5 million on already. So they had to pay that first 10 million by the 4th of December, which they did, albeit a few minutes late. And in doing so, they breached the terms of the injunction, because the granted Charles Street Investments a fixed and floating charge over all their assets, which they weren't allowed to do. But it was subsequently validated, i.e. approved by the court, because all the money did go to Valeri. So I don't think they did themselves any favours with Judge Marcus Smith by doing it the way they did, but it was subsequently effectively rubber stamped. So when the court was convened on the 18th of December, we had the timetable fixed, which most people will be aware of, which was the next payment by the 31st of January. And then two subsequent payments on the 31st of March and the 31st of December. So the first one's 10 million, then the next two are 7.5 million each. So by then he'll have paid 35 million if he pays it, and then there's what we call a run payment, which if there's anything owed over and above that, then it has to be paid on the 30th of June, because at the moment we don't necessarily know what all the costs are going to be, because they've got to be assessed, it's called, which is where the court look at it and decide what amount has to be paid. But you'll notice with most of the hearings there's like an interim payment made. That doesn't necessarily, I think it was £60,000 on Monday. That doesn't necessarily mean that's all that Valeri's legal team will be allowed, but it's just the interim bit, and then the balance is paid when the court's had a good look at it. So, so that's the background. So obviously we were all waiting with bated breath to see whether this 10 million will be paid. And in the meantime, I think it's fair to say that Owen had hung his hat on being granted permission to appeal. And he would then ask the court to give him more time, effectively restructure that on the basis that he may get the judgment reduced. So the chronology, the recent chronology starts on the Monday. Which Monday was it? It was last Monday, wasn't it? So I lose track now. It was a week last Monday. The Courts of Appeal confirm that permission to appeal has been denied. People who are in the legal profession, and quite a lot of people who were in court, will not be surprised by that, essentially because Judge Marcus Smith sat through 16 days of evidence and reached a decision. Some people might think the way he came about the figure was a little high, but he had a very wide discretion. People who follow what we say on the forums will have heard that we're saying that, there's such a wide discretion, it's very difficult to appeal and exercise a discretion, because you've got to show no reasonable judge would reach that decision. So that decision didn't surprise. Obviously we were all concerned that they might just get, as they did in Manchester, get one in, and that doesn't mean that the appeal will be allowed. It would have meant it would have gone to the next stage, but that would have dragged things out. So that seems to have sent the Owen Oyston particularly, and his legal team into panic mode. Owen has dismissed his existing legal team and replaced them with the new one. There was an application made the following day on the Tuesday to effectively try and extend time. And from what we could gather from what actually happened on Monday, that seemed to involve saying, give us until the 31st of May to raise it all, but don't make us pay anything in the meantime. And effectively, Owen's saying, I'm trying to avoid having to a fast sale of assets. So everybody's going to be interested in the type of things he's got to sell, of course, knows he's desperate, and therefore aren't necessarily going to offer what he thinks they're worth. Which is a shame. So that happened on the Tuesday. Obviously, we didn't know that then, but that's when the application went in. And then on the Wednesday, we were all sat refreshing AVFTT. Come 3:45, 4 o'clock, weren't we, seeing if there was any news about him paying? And as we now know, he didn't. It would appear that, which I'll come back to in questions, that there was some form of an offer of a loan to him, but he chose not to accept it, and that came up on Monday in court. So that money wasn't paid. In the meantime, there was some suggestion that Valeri had agreed something. What he'd actually done, I think, before the application had been issued, was that there'd been a request for some more time. And I think Valeri's legal team had said, look, let's be seen to be reasonable before Marcus Smith. So we'll offer you a 7-day extension to pay the 10 million, but there's some very stringent conditions attached, one of which we subsequently learned on Monday would have been that you agree to a receiver being appointed. I'll explain a little bit more about what that would involve later, but it would involve a receiver being appointed if you don't pay within 7 days. So that offer wasn't accepted anyway. And then on Friday, last Friday, we had the bombshell that Carl had been dismissed. Some talk on the message boards and other forms of social media that might be some elaborate ruse to try and engender some form of sympathy with the court to get extra time. I think that argument was dispelled well and truly on Monday when it came out that Carl had actually written to Clifford Chance and to the court, basically, I think to use Matt's expression, throw him under a bus. He effectively gave the court chapter and verse on exactly what offers they'd had, 13 I think in total, none of which had been accepted. He gave him chapter and verse on the terms of the loan that had been offered and that hadn't been taken up. And whilst the court didn't actually admit that into evidence, I'm sure it will have featured in everybody's minds when it actually came to making a decision about what then happened. And essentially what happened was that the court said, and I know there's been some speculation as to when exactly the money falls due, but effectively the money fell due there and then on the hearing, because the court said for two things. First of all, you've got to pay the whole lot forthwith now. Obviously Owen wouldn't be able to do that necessarily, and he gave permission to Valeri to commence enforcement action. All the assets are still subject to this injunction, so they can't be sold without the court's approval. So effectively they can't start putting assets in other people's names. They're subject to an injunction, and that would be contempt of court and lead to you being imprisoned. Effectively, subject to discussions about things that come out. That's the chronology of what happened. It's quite complicated, but I'm here to answer all any questions that anybody might have as best I can, in an attempt to hopefully ensure everybody leaves here a little wiser as regards where exactly the court process stands, and perhaps more importantly from our perspective, where Blackpool FC stands.
So, why did Carl put that in the email?
Why did Carl do what?
What was it? What he put in the email about the offers? Surely he didn't need to say that, did he? Why would he? From his point of view, why would he do that?
I can only speculate. There's two things. First of all, Carl was, because I didn't mention Vicky Oyston also stood down, of course, but she, unlike Carl, resigned rather than being dismissed on that Friday. We only found out about that on Tuesday of this week. But to answer the question, I would say there's two possible explanations for Carl's actions. We don't actually know what's in the email, other than what's obviously said in court, but the 13 offers was most certainly referred to, and the loan was most certainly referred to. Two explanations. There's clearly been a family rift going back in before Carl is dismissed, and logic suggests that's down to a difference of opinion as to where things should go from here. Owen appears to be determined on any basis to keep hold of the football club, and we can speculate as to the reasons behind that. Carl and other members of the family, and I think that includes Vicky Oyster and his mum, I think probably with the view that it's time to pack up and go. I suspect it might be payback for dismissing him very publicly, and secondly, I suspect it might be an attempt to force the situation where he enters into dialogue with Valeri or with any other potential purchaser with a view to selling the football club and putting this whole sorry mess behind them, because we will go on to discuss the implications of Owen keeping the football club, but it's not a very particularly great scenario from the Oyston, forget about Owen, the Oyston family's perspective, that they've got such a huge amount of money to pay and the threat of enforcement hanging over them in relation to all and any assets they've got. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Obviously there's a great deal of concern about the potential for him to get this loan, but surely, is he not still legally married to Vicky? Does she not have any input into what he can and can't do as regards assets?
So the question was, what role does Vicky Oyston, this is Vicky Oyston Senior, play in this? Yeah. Short answer is, we don't really know. She was a director. She had been a director going back into the 80s, from what I can recall. Most certainly from the 90s when Owen went to prison and she took over. She very much, I think, I get the impression she lives her own life up on the Clawton estate. I think we can. I think she'll have influence with the family as any matriarch will do. But how that ties in with Owen's thought process is a completely another matter.
But legally though, does she still legally married to him? Does she not have any? Can she not put the kibosh on this loan scenario? And if he's having to sort of put all the assets up as
Owen owns the shares in Blackpool, or the majority of the shares in Blackpool Properties, what used to be Suggester. Suggester in turn owes 77% or thereabouts of Blackpool Football Club. So the reality is, if there's an argument between man and wife, if the particular spouse who has the assets decides they're going to do something, then they will do it. I mean, if in a divorce scenario, there's an ability sometimes to interfere and to control, or to at least have some influence as to what happens in relation to business sales, particularly if there's something amiss. But that's not the scenario here. So the short answer is no. If, at the end of the day, Owen is the one who holds the shares and holds the decision-making process from the Oyston's family's perspective in relation to the football assets. I don't know how it's structured with other things, but most certainly that's the case with the football club.
Yeah, but with other assets which would need to form a big part of the security, does she not have any as a?
We don't know. I mean, without analysing the structure, and it's a tangled web anyway. But without knowing specifically what shares she's got in every company. But the most of the assets are the ones that they've gone for, the ones either in Owen's name, Carl's name, Blackpool Football Club's name, or Suggester's name. I don't know. We don't actually know, to be honest. And Robbie probably is not there at the moment, but he's sat in court more than most people. But I'm not aware that we've ever been told exactly what assets are subject to this injunction. So we are completely Scott. We haven't had a list, have we?
No, they don't really say it out.
No, all we hear is what we pick up is what they talk about. And I think at certain hearings, the Oystons wanted us excluded because of the sort of private nature of the discussions taking place. And the judge wouldn't do that, but he did sort of indicate that the actual contents of the witness statements that dealt with what assets there were wouldn't be something that would be openly discussed. I think that's how they ultimately dealt with it. So we end up with a a snapshot really. There's fair few people in this room have a good idea what they do own, but I think equally none of us know everything that they own. So, sorry, who? All right.
I was just saying that Scott's right. We've never seen a definitive list.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Certain things do get mentioned in the course specifically, but we've never seen anything in the course.
Right. Next question back there.
How does it sort of fall with sales of assets and taxation? Obviously, there's going to be a big tax bill here liable. Is that potential to send them bankrupt, and then what effect would that have on?
Well, there seems to me that there's a number of implications. I'm not a tax advisor, but the write-off for the loans. There's been a bit of a debate as to whether that does or doesn't trigger a tax liability. Clearly, if the HMRC view them as disguised dividends, then as well as any corporation tax that has been paid at the moment, that would then anybody who does have a company and draws an income off it, you'll know when you take your dividends, you also pay your own personal income tax on top of the corporation tax that's already been paid. So that's a possibility. I suppose there's also theoretically a CGT liability, capital gains tax, but there's also a lot of losses to offset against that. So the short answer is, when you come, what is probably an opportune time for me to mention, when we talk about what Valeri can do with a football club, he can't actually just waltz in there and seize it. It's a rather unique asset anyway. In that, what I say is, if for instance, if you've got, let's say like the properties on Queen Street that were up for auction this week, it's relatively easy for someone like Valeri with a judgment like this to go and seize that, because it's bricks and mortar. You can easily get a charge on it and then force a sale on it. In fact, he might just be able to go, we're bearing in mind the terms of the order, he might just be able to go for an order for sale. But what happens then is, you get conduct of the sale, so you can appoint an estate agent, you get the offers in and get court approval to sell at whatever price. With other things, they potentially have to go to auction, but when you've got something that you need to sell as a going concern, it creates the problem of what happens between the point you seize it, or the court seizes it, and the point of sale. And of course, the last thing we want, or Valeri would want, I think, is a scenario where the football club was seized, but then the whole infrastructure just collapses. So this is why I think, even though Marcus Smith said something to the contrary, and I don't profess to be in his league, but he didn't explain why he had views to the contrary, but I think you'd have to have a court receiver appointed if the football club was actually going to be seized, because what a receiver, just very simply, normally is an accountant. So you'd have somebody like KPMG or equivalent. They would be appointed to oversee everything, but on a practical level, they would put in a manager. So they would probably appoint a football experienced chief executive who would come into, in recent times we've had Matt Williams and then more recently Alex Cowdy. They would bring somebody in with relevant experience who would actually run the football club and make sure everything was done properly whilst it was sold, because it could take 4, 5, 6 months to sell, because you can't sell a football club like that just overnight. It just doesn't happen. Everybody wants to do the due diligence, which means go and look at the books, go and look at all sorts of terms of leases and things like that might be, if the stadium was being sold as well. So for all those reasons, it is unlikely to happen overnight, and somebody's got to run it in the meantime. That might be one of the reasons, on a practical level, why we'll see Valeri stay away from doing that. Firstly, because it could cause complications for the football club itself, and secondly, because at the moment, as we know, he's subject to an automatic ban issued by the EFL, and as a result of that, if he were to successfully acquire the football club through this process, whilst that EFL ban is in place, they wouldn't allow him to take it over. Now that would create a potentially disastrous situation where effectively I don't know what. I mean, I know what they did with Leeds. They gave him so long, Cedilio. They gave him so long to I forgot his name, how you pronounce his name now. But the Leeds Italian chap, they gave him so long to sell. I don't know what they'd have done if he hadn't sold in that period. But presumably, the ultimate sanction is suspension from the league. And so, Valeri, in his statement, I think was quite clear that he doesn't want to do anything that jeopardises the football club. I think we may well see him try and enforce against non-football related assets in the first instance. What I hope is that Owen is going to be forced to the negotiating table, because that's the way forward. But in that scenario, when we spoke about this, if anybody listened to the Facebook piece that Matt and I did on Wednesday, the EFL have a very important role to play here, in my view, because and it's right and proper that under the rules that if anybody is convicted of a criminal offence, that they should automatically be banned. But when it then becomes patently obvious that it's a politically motivated judgment issued by a country whose legal system is not well respected, let's put it politely, around the world, that they should then look at that quite carefully. It's not like they can't see what's gone on. It's not like they can't see what Marcus Smith has concluded after 16 days of hearing evidence, and say we're going to lift that automatic ban until somebody satisfies us to the contrary that it should be reinstated. That's common sense. I think our experience of the EFL at the moment is that common sense doesn't seem to feature very highly on the way they operate, and that's something I think as a trust, and hopefully through the petition and hopefully through other actions that we might look to instigate, are going to try and address. But it's rather frustrating that an organisation that whether they believe they're meant to be representing the fan base or not, in effect do through their fit and proper test have a lot to say, could be standing in the way of a solution. Even if we get to the point where Owen and Valeri agree terms, until the EFL deal with the matter, any solution can't be implemented, and it'd be very frustrating for us and for everybody else if that were the case, particularly when you look at the findings on that 160-odd page judgment, which makes it perfectly clear to most people who's more fit and proper to operate a football club.
Just to underline that point that Tim's making there, I mean, further down the line, not certain what's going to happen here, but there's going to be some form of conflict with the EFL, pretty significantly really, because they've got a front line of communications people that we deal with, and we send countless emails back and forth, and you've seen some of them that were sent out to you because we're trying to make it all open and accountable to expose what's going on. And the way that they go about avoiding decisions is quite a strategically clever, bureaucratic way of doing it. I've never come across an organisation as opaque as the EFL. It really is interesting. But the deeper we're getting into it, the more we're speaking with people. I mean, not many of you know, they are one of the governing bodies of the FA, Football Association. The EFL is a private limited company. Yeah, it's owned by 72 Football League club owners. So they'd say, oh, we represent the supporters, or you know, they're nothing to do with the supporters. They will back the owners 100%. You could almost guarantee if the Oystons got the upper hand and kept hold of the club, they back the Oystons. If Bellicon was able to take over the club, they back Bellicon. They just back the owners. They're nothing to do with the fans. In fact, they're probably the enemy of the fans, the EFL. They're the enforcement body of the Football Association, and they've sat and let all this happen, and they've done nothing really. So we don't expect a great deal from them, but I think they're a bit more strategically minded than we think they are, to be honest. And we don't know what's coming further down the line with this lot, but they're going to be a potential big issue for us. And I think it's incumbent on us as Blackpool fans to blow the lid on this, to really get it wide open. So when people know, for instance, like the FA have people from Oxford University and Cambridge University sat on the board deciding what happens at grassroots football level, and that the EFL is a private company owned by owners of clubs. A lot of people don't know any of this. You know, and I think it's when all this comes out, then things are going to start moving potentially.
Surely then there's no pressure that can be put to bear on the FA to help with this change?
We'll put pressure on the FA. FA, believe it or not, you know the Premier League get £5 to £10 billion from these ridiculous money, rich deals that they get, and they're obsessed with money. The EFL is obsessed with money. We have meetings with the EFL. They say, right, for the first 55 minutes, we're going to tell you how great we are. And we want to say, we're not interested in what you've done money-wise. We're interested about what's happening to our clubs. And Coventry are, and Charlton are. We're not really interested in all that, but they insist, no, we want to tell you how great we are. Look at our new deal that we've done. So the FA is the governing body. The FA gets money from the government. The Premier League and the EFL don't give anything to the FA. I mean, how ridiculous is that? You know, they have to go with a begging bowl to government to get a grant to survive, effectively. They look after the England team, England's ladies, Wembley, and a few other things. But it's the whole thing's just totally cockeyed. So we can put pressure on the FA, but the EFL was always the shining light of the FA. The FA was founded first 1863, then the EFL came around as a private company and it's been run like that. Very profitable ever since then. The Premier League set up in '92. So you get very powerful institutions, and government is nervous to intervene. It's a bit like the United Nations. They never want to intervene in a sovereign country, do they? Say there's a problem in Wales, we don't want to send the troops in, or the United Nations peacekeeping force. It's up to them. Government and private businesses are like that. They're regarded as sacrosanct. It's a strange thing. And the EFL, when all this, I think the shit's going to hit the fan with these people soon. I really do. And we're going to be the ones that are going to cause this trouble. They're going to go straight to FIFA, the EFL, and say, look what's going on here. If the government do back Blackpool supporters, just start getting involved, the EFL can cry wolf to FIFA and say, what are you going to do? And FIFA can say, well, we can stop England playing in international games because you are being attacking one of our member organisations, the EFL. I mean, it's as that Masonic and mental. It's hard to believe it, isn't it? Robbie?
No wonder with having Sepp Blatter involved for so many years, is it?
Absolutely, mate.
Just to give people a flavour of what we're dealing with here. The EFL very often in letters tell you that there is nothing that they can do. But actually, if you go to their website and you look at the disciplinary section, there's a very long list of things that they're able to do in respect of failure, and it goes on for a page and a half. What that doesn't say is how they would use those powers and in what circumstances they would use those powers. So I yesterday went to their policy and publications area of their website thinking I'll find it there. What I found there was the name of the policy officer, the man who supports him, and an inquiry line. And no policies and no publications. I think the truth of the matter is they don't know what to do. They don't have any policies for dealing with anything like this, and therefore it is convenient for them to just hide behind their regulations and their cosy relationship with the clubs involved as an exercise in doing nothing.
I think you're right, Robbie, and I think it's incumbent upon us. I mean, hopefully we'll get some form of equilibrium at some time and these idiots will leave the club. But we owe it to the rest of the footballing world, don't we, this? It's just like an obscene situation for this to exist, you know. It means so much to people's lives, communities, businesses, everything that we do, you know, our whole DNA. And it's just like the most inadequate governance structure of any organisation. Look at any other industry, the health industry or the legal profession. There's proper structured governance in place. In football, they just do what they want to do, basically. But anyhow, I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry, one question.
I actually have two questions. The first one, I don't know if it's a real thing or whether an elaborate ABFTT lie or whatever, but is the £25 million loan real? And secondly, Andy, we had a conversation on the phone the other day regarding this situation with the EFL, and the biggest obstacle that you said with regards to tackling this was finances, and being of a kind of millennial generation, whatever you want to call it, I definitely think there's a way to crowdsource and crowdfund the money that it would take to start bringing action to the EFL as a private company. With the kind of online stuff that I do with regards to Blackpool, there's a lot of people who aren't just Blackpool fans. There's Charlton fans, Leyton Orient fans, Blackburn fans, Leeds fans, West Ham fans, Newcastle fans, who all have problems with the way that the Football League is run. And I believe, ultimately, it's the fact that there's not enough money to tackle it, to question it, because of the hierarchical structure in which it's set out. So it's a very ambitious prospect, but I think us as Blackpool fans should be used as a case study. Our club should be used as a case study for the very low extreme of what could happen if you allow private ownership in football. And I believe now is a perfect opportunity. That window is very, very small, and it allows us, if a plan was to come about, that we could tackle this and not just take this to the Oyster store, but take it to the Football League store, and you said it the other day, the German model is perfect now, and there's a reason why they won the World Cup last time, because they're fantastic, because of the way that their Bundesliga's won, Bundesliga 2,